Hey guys, I'm Simon, and welcome back to the Aether Hub for more Magic the Gathering lore. With Ixalan's story finally behind us and Dominaria rapidly approaching, like really rapidly, because next week starts the official storyline of the Dominaria story arc. With that in mind, we're going to celebrate the return to Magic's original plane by going over the history of Dominaria and its place as the nexus of the multiverse. The long, complex history of Dominaria all starts at the very beginning of Magic's timeline, at least the timeline that awesome Vorthos players have managed to assemble, with the birth of Nicol Bolas on the plane of Dominaria. Yes, the birth of Nicol Bolas is the oldest known recorded event in Dominaria's history. Pretty crazy, right? Anyway, when Bolas was born, Dominaria was ruled by a race of beings known as the Elder Dragons, the ancestor of today's dragons across the entirety of the multiverse. These Elder Dragons were probably amongst the most powerful races in the entire history of MTG, and although we don't know the full extent of their power, we know that Bolas was described in the Time Spiral novel as being godlike, even before he gained his spark, so the implication is that they were extremely powerful. However, they were still dragons, and the hallmark of dragons are their greed and lust for power, which resulted in a massive conflict known as the Elder Dragon War. We don't know much about the conflict itself, except that the victors were Nicol Bolas and 4 of his brethren: Arcades Sabbath, Chromian Rule, Palladium Wars, and the Victus Asmondi. Unlike the other 4, something was different about Bolas. He was in fact a Planeswalker, and his spark had ignited, making him the first and only Elder Dragon Planeswalker. The losers of the war were stripped of their title and their wings, made unable to fly, and eventually devolved into worms. Speaking of worms, wouldn't it be pretty awesome if we finally got a legendary worm creature in Dominaria? I mean, who's going to lead my worm commander deck, right? After a few years, Dominaria had its first Planeswalker visitor, a demonic Leviathan, the only one of its kind that we know of. Wasting no time, Nicol Bolas and this nameless intruder engaged in conflict over the continent of Madara, one of the few countries on Dominaria. The battle between these two had lasted for an entire month, and it was so fierce that it not only reduced the country to 1/3 of its former size, but it also created the first temporal rift on the plane. Finally, Nicol Bolas had emerged victorious. He then feasted on the Leviathan's corpse for a whole year, absorbing its power, and once that was done, the only thing that remained was its skeletons, a symbol of his victory that he dubbed the Talon Gates, one of his most prized possessions. Now we jump ahead several centuries to the formation of the Thran Empire. For those of you who are unaware of the Empire, it was one of the oldest and most advanced civilizations on Dominaria. It was a nation of artificers who had used their power stones, yes, those power stones you might recognize from the history of Urza, to empower their artifacts. But, like with every great nation, there was internal conflict, especially when it came to how things were being done. This conflict was not about the usage of the Power Stones or how artifacts were constructed. No, it was something simpler, yet still more complex. The conflict revolved around the usage of medicine. Some factions had argued that their magic and Power Stone based approach to medicine was the key to their medical advancements, while others had argued that a more materialistic approach should be taken. This might sound out of place in this video, but it would become really important soon. At some point in Thran's history, Glacian, the leader of the capital city, Helicon, was wounded in a riot, and traditional medicine couldn't help him. Desperate, he turned to a less traditional approach and called for the lead doctor and expert in the field, a man named Yawgmoth, the same man who would eventually become the most dangerous and most powerful entity in the whole of Magic the Gathering. Yawgmoth had identified the disease and concluded that it was a direct result of Power Stone radiation. You see, a source of power, the stones were emanating harmful radiation. The radiation from a single stone wasn't really harmful, but when you're surrounded by them all the time, you're risking developing a disease due to the radiation exposure. In that, it's very similar to today's radiation that can be found in nuclear power plants. Yawgmoth's discovery of this disease was extremely controversial, and many in positions of power had outright refused to believe him. However, most of the population was already diseased, and Yawgmoth had used his medical expertise and the discovery of this illness to gain influence with them. riots broke out across the Empire, and Yawgmoth was exiled. Various events have occurred within the Empire during Yawgmoth's exile, most notable being the ever-growing unrest and arrival of the Planeswalker known as Defed, that and Yawgmoth discovering Phyrexia. When Yawgmoth had returned from exile, he was met with a lot of opposition coming from the Empire, but there were also those who had supported him. Regardless of the opposition, Yawgmoth had managed to secure a position of power within the Empire, and had created a portal to Phyrexia beneath the Empire's capital city. He then slaughtered the city's population and used their remains as part of his Phyrexian horrors. This, of course, led to a civil war breaking out across the Empire, but unfortunately, Yawgmoth managed to win with the help of his newly created machine army. The war had ended with the destruction of the capital city, and the Phyrexian army retreating back through their portals, which were later destroyed. The aftermath was pretty clear. Despite all the setbacks, Yawgmoth had won. Yes, he was eventually chased away from Dominaria, but the Thran Empire was completely destroyed as a result of the war. All of its artificial advancements, all of its revolutionary discoveries, all gone, left forgotten in an ancient history. That is, until two brothers, two genius artificers, stumbled upon a Power Stone, an event that marks the beginning of the longest and most devastating war in the history of the multiverse. But that's a story for a different video. And that, you guys, is basically our first chapter into the long history of Dominaria. How will these events be interpreted with our return to Dominaria coming soon? Who knows? But brushing up on this history will certainly serve us well as we move forward. Anyway guys, let me know what you think about this story in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, why don't you give it a like, subscribe for more, and of course share it across the multiverse. As always guys, thank you all so much for watching. I'm Simon, and I'll see you again next time here on the Aether Hub.